I don't pretend to agree with every plank in our party's platform, but fake culture wars only distract us from our economic decline. And nobody in this race is being honest about it except Donald Trump.
In 2016, Peter Thiel, billionaire co-founder of PayPal and Palantir Technologies, made waves in Silicon Valley by endorsing Donald Trump's campaign for president. Then, in 2022, he sponsored J.D. Vance's Senate run to the tune of $15 million, the single largest donation to a senatorial campaign ever. Palantir is a big data analytics firm that's been working with the U.S. government for over 20 years. Their stock began a rally after President Trump won re-election. But soon after, Alarx Karp, the CEO of Palantir, published a book on February 18th, after which Palantir stock took a precipitous nosedive. What happened? Was the book really that bad?
One of my favorite tweets was this guy, Alex Bletchman, who says, sci-fi author, in my book, I invented the torment nexus as a cautionary tale. Tech company, at long last, we have created the torment nexus from the classic sci-fi novel, Don't Create the Torment Nexus.
So you should pump this shit like they do in the future. So you should pump this shit like they do in the future. So you should pump this shit like they do in the future. So you should pump this shit, pump this shit, pump this shit, pump this shit in your floating whip system. Pump this shit in the breadline, the prison. Pump this shit from the chip under your wrist skin. Pump this shit.
So fucking paranoid.
And public school is about to be one teacher on a Zoom that thousands of kids are on with like some proctor, probably outsourced to another country, watching to make sure that they don't flash any nudes.
I don't hate the fucking big tech bros, because out of all of them, Elon is the only one that's giving all of these crackheads a fucking voice. I want you to try and pull that shit on fucking Facebook and see how long you last.
They're oligarchs. They're 100% oligarchs. They believe in techno-feudalism.
We make the case that one of the most significant challenges that we face in this country is ensuring that the U.S. Department of Defense turns the corner from an institution designed to fight and win kinetic wars to an organization that can design, build, and acquire AI weaponry, the unmanned drone swarms and robots that will dominate the coming battlefield.
So Carlos, is that your name?
Yes, it is.
I've heard that you were some kind of a geologist or something.
Definitely in that ballpark, but with a different every part of it. I'm a philosopher. I do philosophy of science primarily.
I'm a continental, so I raise my nose to such droll subjects.
Isn't that just like the default state for continental philosophy? Like, what's different?
Yeah. Oh man.
Like I hang on to writers based on like one or two ideas and then I move on. Like I've never dug like the deepest I ever dug into anybody was Kant in undergrad, and it struck me that his system made a lot of sense to him, and that it was the kind of thing where if you bought the entire system, everything in the world seemed to make sense. And I've just never been a big believer in systems. I think that we're probably going to be wrong about most things, but if we accept that, then we can jump from topic to topic and like take the most intuitive approaches in each of them, and most of them might be wrong, but a couple of them might be right. Whereas if you insist on a holistic system where every part interconnects and it's all consistent, you're only going to be right if the entire system's right. And that, to me, just it makes a more fragile worldview.
Do you know the parable of the fox and the hedgehog?
Yeah. Berlin? Is that Berlin? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I always forget which one's which.
I guess it was all inspired by this like fragment of poetry from antiquity, which just goes, the fox knows many things, but the hedgehog knows one big thing.
Damn, I would have flipped it in my head, but okay. The fox is the one that's multi. Yeah, I'm definitely much more of a fox. I always think
That's what I was picking up on. That's what made me think.
I always think of Thomas Aquinas, who has this line that's beware of the man of the one book,
Mm,
and I think people interpret it in both the way that he meant it and the opposite. So I don't know which one is the actual correct version of it. But either way, I'm wary of having a single.
sure. I never heard that quote of Aquinas. It's interesting, kind of funny for someone who's such a big fan, one would assume, of the Bible. So
Yeah, fair enough. But Aquinas, I mean, in his time, he was trying to like reconcile Aristotle with the Bible, right? And that's hard. I mean, they have everything that they base is just a different world that they lived in, right?
mhm.
So,
Well, I think you can, believe in like the truth of relativity or that everything that we know now is going to be wrong. And at the same time still, make big systems, like throw your hat in the ring.
yeah, I'm not against it in principle if that's how people want to like live their lives. I'm wary that of thinking that any of these systems will succeed. Um, like y- y- I'm reminded of ooh, this is gonna be a long walk. Do you guys want to go for a long walk? Let's do a long walk. Um, the Challenger explosion, right? When people were building the space shuttle, um, at every step along the process, there were choices that had to be made, including how big to make it, which was based on DoD just regulations. And then it turns out that the Army pulled away from the NASA contract, so they made it too big for too long without having a reason for it later on. But like at every point, they make different choices to try to make it to solve the problem of the day. And eventually, you've made so many choices leading up to building a big system that some of those choices don't work together because they were built to solve earlier problems and not the problems you're facing now. Um, and so I'm wary about like big systems in general for that reason. Like it could be that all of the stuff makes sense and then you combine it and it falls apart.
But I mean, you have to risk that if you're going to build big things, right?
Sure.
So I just finished listening to the audiobook. Alarx Karp, the CEO of Palantir, just dropped a book.
20 years ago, this was like from Mars freak show, all these views. The West must defend itself. The people producing this thing called software must be aligned with our government. We should not allow software institutions, to sell to our adversaries, but not sell to the US government. The world will become disjointed and more violent.
An entire generation of extraordinarily talented engineers in Silicon Valley will not hesitate to dedicate their working lives to building, online shopping algorithms, the consumer apps on our phone. But when a US Marine asks for a better software system, they hesitate. So much talent, so much funding in the Valley has rushed toward the consumer at the expense of what we would argue are more significant projects, from national defense to local law enforcement, healthcare, education. The question is, where do we want the resources of our country and our civilization to go?
The way you dominate the future is you dominate the present. I want America to be American in 1,000 years.
So Palantir, which was founded in 2003, is like, we're going to work for the government. We're going to build surveillance software or data mining software that'll do big things for big customers like the state. And so he it's interesting because the CEO is not an engineer at all. He's not a programmer.
That's
He's
the
like,
guy from the book.
yeah. And Alarx Karp, he's not an engineer. He went to school. He was a philosophy major. He studied under Jürgen Habermas. Since he's basically building Big Brother, I'm pretty much like, I should not like this guy or trust him, right? But it's interesting because some of the things he says, he's like a little bit singing my song. I'm kind of like, yeah, that's true. Like maybe we should build bigger things. Maybe not everything should be dictated by market consumer demand. Like I think that's true.
Do they currently have contracts with governments like around the world? Palantir, is that like, are they based in Israel?
No, you're thinking of Pegasus.
Okay, because I was like, yeah, I did watch the Ronan Pharaoh documentary recently on that company, Pegasus. Sounds very similar though.
Yeah, what does Palantir mean?
Yeah, I don't know.
Palantir is
Saruman's orb.
Yeah. It's the orb from Lord of the Rings that allows the wizards to spy on people.
You see,
Oh, okay.
used
Very.
by the first men of Arnor. What was it, Arnor or Angmar?
You have had this very close relationship with the U.S. government and U.S. intelligence agencies. The rumor is that Palantir helped with the hunt for Osama bin Laden. Why don't you just give us an overview of where Palantir is today? I mean, you obviously have expanded well beyond.
Yeah, I mean, his Chia
Well, we
Pet
built
thing
Palantir,
is,
starting in 2004 to supply the
it's
U.S. intelligence
giving
community with
mad
world-class
scientists.
software platforms. And we built one called PG, which now powers a lot of the Western world, both inside the U.S. and outside of the U.S., most notably in Europe. And that allows intelligence, defense, and police officials to more accurately track data, the provenance of data,
Giving
and
Dr.
the people that are interested in
Frankenstein
tracking in
just
accordance with the law.
electrocuted
And
himself.
subsequently, we built platforms for special operators and in the more kind of data aggregation space. And so Palantir went from being what you could see as a niche player for the intelligence community, highly classified intelligence community, to what you could call the platform upon which data analytics are done inside and outside the U.S. in the course of 10 years.
Right. So data analytics for big companies, including, I think, Airbus, and also for the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Authority, and that's where Palantir has become very controversial. You know, your critics have basically said that you, Palantir, are aiding with human rights abuse, the separation of children from their parents. What do you make of that? What is your response to that critique?
Well, I'm actually deeply sympathetic to people who are concerned about the use of software platforms, both ours and others, because of the inherent power they have. And so they have to be closely looked at and closely regulated in a granular and transparent way. We went from being a small company to a company that powers most of the West and its key institutions, including in Homeland Security. And so there are really important questions. Under what conditions can you use the software? Who can be surveilled? How does the surveillance happen? How is the data managed? And what is the consequence of surveillance? I believe every single one of those questions has to be decided by society in an open debate, and the enforcement of which has to be clear and transparent. So that's also a software problem, and we're very highly specialized in those problems. I do not believe that these questions should be decided in Silicon Valley by a number of engineers at large platform companies. And so for me, the question is, these are really serious, consequential questions that will affect all of our lives in a very significant way now and in the future, and I've already affected them in ways that people understand and don't understand. Do we want a motley crew of people in Silicon Valley who build platforms deciding which institutions work, under what conditions, what is the execution, which institutions, by the way, don't work, and under what conditions? We at Palantir have a view, which is that in societies where there is a functioning democracy, meaning that there are checks and balances enforced by a functioning judiciary, we have supplied the software, and we will continue to supply the software.
This is what victory feels like. Yeah. This is an important seminar, but this one, this one really mattered. And I just want to say thank you for making it happen. Thank you.
It was interesting. It feels like it's he's like, hey, we're just the hammer. You guys could use us to bash people's heads in, or use it for nails.
Mm-hmm.
But like, it's not.
Yeah.
Man.
But we strongly disagree with the user.
Also, he talks about this need for public discourse and opening up for public discourse, but like the nature of his product is like,
Private.
yeah, it's like a private. It's hidden. It's to be. Yeah, it's not open. I can't think of the right word, but
yeah, it's close.
Well, counterpoint, they've gone public. You can buy shares. So
but we like this whole thing with like where we're at right now with like how little any of us understand what's being done with our like data, and then just not even data, like just with like cameras, voices, everything, all these things that are actually being taken to feed and train AI as well. None of us have any clue.
Yeah.
So we can debate about it all we want, but this stuff is like so far above most of our understandings.
The leaders of Silicon Valley are drawn from a disembodied generation of talent in America that is committed to little more than vehement secularism, but beyond that, nothing much of substance. We must, as a culture, make the public square safe again for substantive notions of the good or virtuous life, which, by definition, excludes some ideas in order to put forward others. It is the pluralism which threatens to submerge us all, as the moral philosopher Alistair MacIntyre has written, that must be resisted. It is now time, as he made clear, to construct new forms of community within which the moral life can be sustained. An aspirational desire for tolerance of everything has descended into support of nothing. The contemporary left establishment inhabits a prison of its own making. Like a caged animal, it is left to pace furtively, unable to offer an affirmative vision of a virtuous or moral life whose content it long ago stripped away to the bare essentials. We must instead now conjure a new resolve, as the author and art critic Roger Kimball has written, and indeed self-confidence, faith in the essential nobility of one's regime and one's way of life.
So what do you think? Left owned, you know?
My reaction to that is opposed to what? Like what alternative is he saying?
There's a lot there. I'm trying to. One of my favorite things to note is that the left loves to like rag on the left, and the right loves to rag on the left, and so we end up with just everybody ragging on the left. But anyway, the other thing is like having these overarching goals and like idea, like your eye on the ball rather than like focusing on individual things. I don't know how that directly connects to the Google employees rebelling, though. I feel like that's kind of the opposite, right? Where if the Google employees are rebelling at one thing that the company wanted to do, that seems to be them having the eye on the ball and actually like doing what
Right. And the carpet's full of shit.
Yeah.
Okay,
because it seems like that he is because this whole the whole reason why we've lost like the distinction between good and evil or whatever is because we've been like so like the world has spiraled so much out of our control and is so complex and we feel hopeless all the time. And this guy who is probably, in this like disgusting monomaniacal corporate system probably doesn't have much control in, over what like society should be either. So that's why he has to support the surveillance like initiatives of the government and get these contracts or whatever.
The implications of his first, like that clip in his book, sound to me or what is like ends up being like an authoritarian approach to where it's like we've heard all these ideas, now it's time to get one big idea. Like, I mean, he's pretty evil by my account. A little bit I've seen.
But he welcomes public debate, Jacquelin.
The public square. Oh, how quaint. For one big idea. Yeah, no,
Yeah, it reminds me of like when Samuel Alito in Supreme Court testimony is like, this should be done by Congress, knowing for like Congress hasn't been able to legislate for decades at this point, right? Like it's like, no, 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 you should do that, knowing that you can't actually do
yeah,
that.
none of this can actually be done.
Yeah,
So
just
then,
developing like the tools that can be used by the wrong hands and will be used by the wrong hands.
Right. Well,
Yeah.
Towards what exactly?
Who's that Harvard, the surveillance capitalism lady?
oh, starts with a Z.
Zuboff.
I'll drop it in post.
There's a Harvard
Yes.
person who wrote a book called Surveillance Capitalism. And she's really brilliant and she's just kind of trying to inform the public on what's happening with like our data and like how it's being used. But I watched a lecture of hers in like 2019 and she was talking about all these terrible things to come from AI and just in the next few years. And so this was 2019. So I was looking for a more recent clip because she was talking a lot about the political climate and so I wanted to see what she had to say post this current election. I was trying to find something new. And a lot of like she was speaking at, I don't know, Vassar. She was speaking at some college, but they opened it up to like public comment. And I mean, it was a lot of like dudes who were kind of like, isn't it up to the users? It's you just providing them a tool and then it's up to them how they're using it. Like it's basically putting all of the responsibility on the individual.
But it makes sense that he's drawing from Habermas because Habermas had this, this ideal state of discourse is basically just turn the entire world into a lecture hall. If we turn the whole world into a lecture hall, we will embody the enlightened spirit of.
I feel like instead, the Habermasians kind of turned every lecture hall into a struggle session. That's a joke.
Yeah.
Okay, but is there a kernel of truth in the joke? Because I'm really out to lunch on Habermas and the legacy of his
just that it's very hard to reach the kind of consensus that Habermas is talking about. Right? Like,
gotcha.
It's very, very difficult to do, I think. And I think, I was so a little bit like an Occupy Wall Street problem, right? Like it's really hard to get consensus in most of those spaces.
But also really great for academics who are in lecture halls all day and conceive of their world as lecture halls. And then imagine that philosopher king would imagine their ideal liberal state to be a lecture hall.
Right. What's interesting is that, I've thought about this a lot, ever since you read Plato and you're like, oh, he thinks philosophers should be in charge. Interesting. What a coincidence. But like now, these people who at least, present themselves as philosopher CEOs, perhaps, are at the head of fairly powerful companies that work glove in hand with the US government as well as governments all over the world. So if there is a time where this could actually be realized in the modern age, something like philosopher monarchs, it's like now.
Philosopher CEOs. Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I'm not sure we're quite there yet. It's they're gunning for it. I would say the other thing though about that the quote from Karp is that it also is pretty empty of content. I just want to have the debate,
which is very Habermasian, which is
right.
You know, we are existing within this continual discourse,
right?
Discourse being the end state of a market economy, a marketized marketplace of ideas, right?
Right,
So,
right. And I mean that confidence that he's talking about, like I think that's kind of something maybe to aspire to. That's not like stupid. You should probably like. It's probably good to like the government you live under.
Sure.
I would say, just as a general, but like again, that's pretty vague and empty of content, right? Like, what is the specific kind of government that will make people most happy is like a life or death question for generations, right?
One of the central advantages of Silicon Valley was its embrace, imperfect, halting, and full of contradictions, of an ownership society, a regime in which the labor, the creative talent within organizations, had a substantial stake in the success and outcomes of the businesses they were building. It is easy to forget that the act of granting equity to all employees at a technology company, from administrative assistants to executives, was a radical one in the 1990s, departing from the prevailing model of hourly rates and salaries for an organization's staff, while owners reaped outsized rewards. A handful of other industries had flirted with shared ownership models, from law firms to medical practices, but the significant equity stakes were in practice often limited to a thin swath of managers at the helm of an organization. Silicon Valley went much further, and the strategy proved essential to its success. Many of the world's most prominent technology companies were essentially communally owned. The early participants shared in the risk and the reward. Silicon Valley remains one of the few places in the world where individuals of low birth, to use a phrase of the constitutional law scholar Akil Rita, can own something substantial and participate in the upside of their labor, rather than remain cogs, even if often highly paid cogs, in the ventures of another. Throughout the 1980s and 1990s, a talented graduate could join Goldman Sachs, which was a pioneer of partnership compensation models, or perhaps a white shoe law firm, where attorneys shared the profits and risk of their work. But those experiments have essentially withered. Such firms still attract talented and ambitious minds, but they are paid salaries, often high ones, but salaries nonetheless. The upside of the endeavors and creative energy of labor is captured by the capitalists.
So there's a little tiny bit of that like socialist signaling. It's couched very strongly in celebration of, you know, entrepreneurial tech startups, which aren't exactly for everybody. But yeah, he's doing his thing. He's saying like, hey, I'm not right wing. I'm not, you know, like I think capitalism can be bad sometimes, actually. Like, you know, why are all our brilliant programmers just spending their time, you know, figuring out how to make more efficient burrito taxis? Like, that seems like a waste of talent. And, you know, he makes a string of points like this that I'm like, yeah, I mean, I agree with that point. So yeah, it's definitely not what I expected.
Yeah, I guess I'm a little surprised by that perspective. Yeah, I'm not all the way convinced, just because owning stocks is not the same as, well, first of all, just like majority share, just as a starting point. And that's often like a default in in a lot of publicly traded companies, right?
Like the founders or the initial investors have the majority share, right? Yeah,
right. Or there's a board that has majority share, right?
It's fascinating. I've heard this argument before from libertarians. We were talking about how wonderful Facebook is to, or social media in general is to have discussions wildly and long and I did get into long discussions with libertarians who one in particular argued for universal capitalism, which is more or less what Karp is kind of overlapping. This guy was a big Trump guy, but his whole like thing was if we just give if businesses just are able to allow their employees to buy shares, then they'll be able to start their own companies with those shares, and we'll have this. This is the end goal of our libertarian politics. And I'm like, and my response to Karp is the same as this guy, because initially I was surprised. I was like, are you signaling in some way some equity? And the answer is no. He's just trying to reinvent Fordism. Fordism did that. Fordism was like the ability to have an assembly line where companies could employ people who had Ford, who worked on the Ford assembly lines, could buy Ford cars that were produced within the factory, and then be able to go and grow and feel like they're a part of the growth of Ford. Was the entire project of the early 20th century, and basically the not the end state, but like the culmination of the Industrial Revolution was the Fordist mode of production. You go to a job for 8 hours, you go on an assembly line, you are able to trade stock in the company, and you take a spiritual investment from that company because your work is being reflected in your life in a meaningful way. And that Fordist mode of production has broken down, and Karp's trying to imagine it as Silicon Valley reinventing the Fordist mode of production is insane, because that mode of production, while it still exists, people are on assembly lines all the time, but like all the Silicon Valley does is employ contract workers. That's goal is to destroy the idea of building up a future through one job. Like, yeah, he is talking about you can start from the bottom and then you're here and you can become like a middle management or a CEO person, but the majority of people that work in these companies are contract. They need 2 or 3 jobs. Like Uber.
Right.
Uber is the exact par excellence example of this. And so I think there is this deep nostalgia for a more perfect capitalism, not a socialist move, a more perfect capitalism that is built within libertarian kind of idealism.
I still get the heebie-jeebies from it. It feels like a trap. Like it feels rhetorically like a trap. But maybe I'm just mistrustful.
Yeah, I mean, leaving aside for a moment the weirdness of like a Silicon Valley guy talking about this, it's certainly the nostalgia of like the early mid 20th century and how capitalism worked for millions of Americans then. The idea of doing that, somehow moving back towards that, sounds pretty good to people. That almost sounds revolutionary because we've fallen so far from that like model, and with a total dearth of like, and how are you going to do that? What's even a plausible way to get even halfway back there, or whatever.
Total war.
Total war.
Design, build, and acquire AI weaponry, the unmanned drone swarms and robots that will dominate the coming battlefield. The 21st century is the software century.
Well, so, I mean, what I mean by total war and that mid-century thing is just the VA bill, right? Like, I think at this point, for our generation, a lot of people got the historical narrative. I don't know about you guys, but it was like a basic thing in like general, college history courses of like the VA bill gave a lot of people homes, gave a lot of people an education, uh, generalized a lot of like increases in standard of living, and that enabled the construction of a welfare state that held these things in common. And if you look at that from the perspective of shareholding, well, I mean, we invaded Europe and the South Pacific in order to have a welfare state, like so that we could have, so that the American sort of population, whatever, the American citizen, I guess that's more specific, yeah, right? The American citizen could have something like the good life, right? And that commonality of experience, but like, what is it based on? Total war, an investment in, and I think it even like mirrors what you were saying, Stephen, about Uber, right? Because like I don't know what the corporate structure of Uber or Lyft are.
They don't make any money, and they employ contract only people in the belief, and this is what I'm going to get with Peter, the belief, because Peter Thiel has an answer to what Karp is saying, and I think Karp and Peter Thiel make sense if you look at it from this. Peter Thiel also has a collectivist belief system, which is that all companies should be monopolies. That the end goal of a company shouldn't be to generate profit. That will come after you have a monopoly, and your goal should monopolize a market share, or a market in general, and profits will come down the line. And what people invest in is the promise that one day this will be a monopoly. You see this with Tesla. Tesla has it is floated. It barely makes a profit. It might make a profit now, but like,
and yet
people,
it's one of the highest valued companies, like,
under the belief that it will one day, that America, or a large part of America, will only be run on Teslas.
Yeah, I mean, there is a concentrated effort currently to, I think, from like big business to discredit Friedman-ism so they can have more government tools at their disposal to control the market, I think.
What is your read in terms of the decline that we've seen over the last week and a half in financial markets?
Well, I think there's actually a lot of reason to be confident, and many people do feel confident. Just look at the nearly $2 trillion in private investment that this president has secured. Look at the comments made by the CEO of Apple, one of the biggest companies in this world, who said that he is bullish on the future of American innovation under the leadership of President Trump. Look at CEO confidence. According to the Conference Board measure of CEO confidence, in Q1 2025, under the leadership of this president, it jumped to its highest level in 3 years, from cautious optimism to confident optimism.
I'm only bringing him up because I've been reading this book and raving about it recently, called The Unaccountability Machine by Dan Davis, who talks a lot about like corporate cybernetics. He's like this ex-stockbroker economist guy, and he basically wrote this book on Stafford Beer, who was this cybernetics guy from England, who was involved with the regime that got couped by Pinochet in Chile.
Jesus.
He was, I don't really know about the guy before Pinochet. Didn't really look it up, but he was using the cyberneticist guy to create the system of like, essentially efficient communication between all like levels of government. And like one of his main ideas was, for example, to give every household a dial that indicates their current satisfaction with the government performance, which averages out and is sent to, upwards, and then the government, has to audit, what's happening right now, for example. But it never really got off the ground because Pinochet did his thing or whatever. And basically was saying that that a cybernetic system depends on channels of communication that keep on working. And Friedman-ism has essentially blocked off a lot of corporate channels of communication because of things like debt and leveraged buyouts. Because the upper echelons are not getting any other signals other than making the next payment to pay off their debt.
So the channels are just like any feedback to the company aside
from the operational level, and upwards to, the executive level.
Okay, like they're not even listening to the workers of their company.
Well, they're pretending to be listening, but they what they hear is next payment, debt, dividends, shareholder value. But it's not even like shareholder value, it's pure profit. What they hear is next payment, debt, dividends, shareholder value. It's The Unaccountability Machine by Dan Davis, and he talks about Stafford Beer, who looks like he looks like, in his younger years, he was very proper, like British gentleman, but like later on, he starts looking like, fucking, who's the guy that made Citizen Kane?
Orson Welles.
Yeah.
Orson Welles with who's the drug philosopher? This is a very extended analogy. Who's the drug philosopher?
I feel like you could put the Mad Libs of that for a lot.
Terrence McKenna?
Oh no, sorry, Buddhist philosophy.
Oh,
Alan Watts.
Alan Watts and Orson Welles.
He was a drunk, or he did die of alcoholism though. Alan Watts, yeah.
Damn.
Yeah, sorry, I kind of like confused the two because they're equally meaningless to me.
Well, I brought with me to this conversation something related, which was Peter Thiel's book, 0 to 1 Notes on Startups or How to Build the Future, where he does talk about monopolies, and his general gist that you get pretty soon in the book is that the goal of any startup is to become a monopoly. And that you can just basically fake it till you make it. You don't have to make a product that creates profit. That is an antiquated idea of looking at companies, and that actually the best way to make a company is to tell your investors one day everyone will have this in their hand. Look at the iPhone. Look at the smartphone. Look at the things that you take for granted. Look at Band-Aids and how everyone calls them Band-Aids. That one day this product, Palantir or Uber, is going to replace the taxi. There won't be any taxis. There's only going to be Ubers. So right now we're just going to burn money and get subsidized in some way, somehow. Nobody knows. That's shadowy behind the scenes. But we need to promise a monopoly. And so here is a quote from Peter Thiel from his section called monopoly capitalism. So a monopoly is good for everyone on the inside, but what about everyone on the outside? Do outsized profits come at the expense of the rest of society? Actually, yes. Profits come out of customers' wallets, and monopolies deserve their bad reputation, but only in a world where nothing changes. In a static world, a monopolist is just a rent collector. If you corner the market for something, you can jack up the price. Others will have no choice but to buy from you. This is what we were just talking about. Think of the famous board game, Monopoly. Deeds are shuffled around from player to player, but the board never changes. There's no way to win by inventing a better kind of real estate development. The relative values of the properties are fixed for all times, so all you have to do is try to buy them up. But the world we live in is dynamic. Everyone loves this world in Silicon Valley. Dynamic. It's possible to invent new and better things. Creative monopoly, blah, 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 blah. Monopolies drive progress because the promise of years or even decades of monopoly profits provide a powerful incentive to innovate. Then monopolies can keep innovating because profits enable them to make the long-term plans and to finance the ambitious research projects that firms locked in competition can't dream of. So why are economists obsessed with competition as an ideal state? It's a relic of history. Economists copied their mathematics from the work of 19th century physicists. They see individuals and businesses as interchangeable atoms, not as unique creators. Everyone loves that word. Their theories describe an equilibrium state of perfect competition because that's what's easy to model, not because it represents the best of business.
Okay, but
then he keeps going.
But of course, the devil is in the details here, like you mentioned, Stephen. Like, what's how do Uber and Palantir is funded by the government, but these other companies, what is behind their huge capitalization? Like, just promises? There's like so much more going on. You can have a business that doesn't make a profit for years, and based off the promise of monopoly, but like, what's really going on there? It's like it's the bourgeoisie moving its excess capital around, deciding where it goes, essentially legislating the future of society via its like capitalization of stuff, which it can do with companies that are burning money. There's always both of these guys, they have this like little bit of subversive, I'm letting you in on a secret, like, oh, like what they've told you is not the right story, and things actually don't work that way. And I think usually in that hook, they are correct about that. And that's, I mean, that's how you get someone to buy in, because then you go, oh, this story that everyone repeats de facto is wrong. Oh, no, well, how does it work then? Tell me, sir, and then you're open to whatever the fuck they're going to tell you.
Yeah. Right. Your life sucks. Of course your life sucks. Let's blame blank. Right. And diverting all of that attention away from what's actually affecting it, and then creating a market out of that disaffection. Really, it drives it. It's powerful. It's powerful to tell someone that you have an answer to their problems.
Right, but it's interesting with Thiel and with Thiel is a little more like self-help plus business help, whereas Karp is like, it's not self-help at all. It's like, this is where we should go as a society. He's like more just directly, this is like what the West, which he likes to talk about a lot, the West needs to do this. Our software powers the West, which is amazing. He says things like this. And it like bridges the gap between that, like, is this self-help, or is this organizational psychology, or is this No, this is just him trying to say, like, this is the new ideology for the regime. Like, this is how we should talk about what we're doing, whatever the hell we decide that is.
Well, and the difference, the sort of vague libertarianism of Thiel and the collectivism of Karp form, in a Hegelian sense, right? Like a perfect little, like, that's the range of debate. There it is.
I also, to kind of bounce off this, I looked up what Michel Foucault says about monopolies as well.
Nice.
He has a large section in this book, The Order of Things. So here's a section from The Birth of Biopolitics. He talks about, he's talking about liberalism and the questions arisen by neoliberalism. First, there is the arguments of monopolies of an historical type, namely that monopoly, far from being a sort of ultimate final phenomenon in the history of the liberal economy, is an archaic phenomenon, the source of which is the intervention of public authorities in the economy. After all, if there is monopoly, it is because the public authorities, or those who at the time assured the functions and exercise of public power, granted privileges to corporations and workshops. It is because states and sovereigns granted monopolies to individuals or families in exchange for financial services in the form of a sort of derivative or concealed tax system. This was the case, for example, with the monopoly granted to the Fugger family by Maximilian I in exchange for financial services. In short, the development in the Middle Ages of a tax system that was itself a condition of the growth of centralized power brought about the creation of monopolies. Monopoly is an archaic phenomenon and a phenomenon of intervention. And I think this is a direct opposition to Thiel. This is like undercutting pretty much Thiel's entire philosophy, that actually
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a case where he says, like, what they don't want to tell you is, and then he just says something completely backwards.
Yeah.
And the one way I realize now what it is, the one way that it like has this tone or sheen of some subversive truth where it almost looks like it overlaps, but really they just don't touch, with this Capitalist Power book that I'm kind of obsessed with, is that they think the time of competitive capitalism is that is anachronistic and over, but not in terms of like people keep trying to do it, but their businesses will fail. They're like, no, like that's being strangled slowly over decades, because we're like we've been like, just through all the mergers of all the big companies and just everything, that just like the space of, whatever you want to say about it, the market competition of, and the possibility that some business can like come in and make its space is like vanishing, and it's been happening slowly over time, over the 20th century. And it's interesting because in place of that obvious, everyone knows that's disappearing. So Peter Thiel can come along and put in the final nail in the coffin and be like, who wants that anyway? That's all bullshit.
Conversely, and why I think Total War is like a really important thing here, at giant death robots aside, it's raising the stakes constantly, right? Like with these greater and greater mergers, sooner or later, those stakes are going to be too high, and or there will be monopolies in one country and no more possibility of expanding, demanding war. That if you run out of things to, and Palantir is gunning for it, man. with the comprehensive surveillance of every aspect of life through these, things.
Order of things.
Yeah, right. Things are the space for dynamic competition is evaporating, such that the only way for that power, the capital S power, right, to continue, because correct me if I'm wrong, but part of the point of capitalist power is that there is a necessary moment of destruction, right? Like you have to kind of limit what is possible to be, expanded.
Yeah, they talk about a kind of phenomena of quote unquote sabotage, where the dominant capital organizations, classes, whatever, sabotage even sometimes their own processes and efficiencies because those might help out the little guy. It's like all about just maintaining their current position. And so if they have to slow down science or slow down any kind of research or slow down whatever, it's like it's like it doesn't matter, even though they're not, this isn't an analysis of monopolies, it behaves kind of like a monopoly, because it's like it's not about them. They're not trying to maximize the efficiency of the product they're creating. They're just trying to create differential gain. So like they can crash the economy on purpose if it'll hurt everyone else more than it hurts them. That's like a smart move in their book. Yeah.
I'm going to say this at risk of my job, Kelly, but what President Trump is doing is insane. It is absolutely insane. It is about the 8th reason we've had for the tariffs, and now he's saying he's putting 50% tariffs on Canada unless they agree to become the 51st state. That is insane. There is just no other way of describing it. And the trouble, Kelly, is that it shows there are no bounds around President Trump. This is very different from the first administration, where there were people around him who seemed to, I don't know what the word is, but smooth over some of the edges now. And the other thing that's not talked about, Kelly, is what's going on within the administration in terms of how they're treating the Constitution and laws. I think all of that is bad for the attraction of capital. And the gentleman from Bridgewater is 100% right. We need massive amounts of capital if we want to fund our deficits, pay for the things we want to pay for, sell our bonds, and have high stock prices. And it seems as if this administration is doing everything it can to chase foreign capital away.
Well, and we could go into the strategy of the insanity as a strategy in terms of our trading
Insanity
partners.
is not a strategy. I'm sorry. I'm with you, Kelly, in trying to look for silver linings. I'm a sunny person.
Not silver linings, tactics, right?
Some explanation for this other than insanity. I'm ready to accept it if you can come up with one.
Have you guys, this might be a bit pop philosophy, but have you guys heard of control society?
Yeah.
By Deleuze. So basically it was like Foucault had like disciplinary society where like the school is the prison, and that's how you control societies, by disciplining it.
Is like nuns hitting you with rulers if you step out of line. The control society is that you would hit yourself with a ruler if you step out of line.
Okay. All right. So the kind of big data surveillance thing, that's like some third other thing.
No, it's control society.
It is control. Okay.
Control society is when, like, disciplinary society is very much you have an authority person in front of you telling you not to do something, or else you'll be punished. And, you're conditioned to not do something under threat of punishment. That is like early 20th century, that's 18th century, 19th century. The body becomes the tapestry for the disciplinarian to remind you, to tattoo you with, and Foucault talks very gruesomely and elegantly about how the body becomes this tapestry for punishment.
But then Deleuze comes along and says like that now under like, post-Fordianism, post-Fordian capitalism, you get a control society where basically the state or corporations kind of will have all the information on you at their disposal, but they don't use it unless it's targeted. And the threat of that alone is much more effective to control society than a disciplinary one.
But what like Deleuze, and so he kind of maps out disciplinary society as this sort of coming from the church, coming from the prison system, and that everything ends up being sort of modeled after a prison. And the panopticon comes from Bentham.
Everyone knows they're being watched.
Yeah.
Even if from time to time, a lot of the time you're not actually being watched, you could be being watched. So everyone behaves, polices themselves. No one has to come around to each cell in the panopticon and like whip them or anything, because everyone knows already they're being watched.
Rather than like watching, train guard Louis coming along after like in the afternoon, you just constantly feel like you are being watched, even though you're probably not. Very likely you're not. But your information is there, and that keeps people in check much better than train guard Louis.
And you have all of these like ways in which people are disciplined, and then they act as though they're always in the state of just about to be disciplined.
Right.
But control society.
That's the control society of the even when there isn't a camera there, or there's a camera there but it's fake, or there's a camera there but no one's watching. You just assume someone's watching.
Yeah, you act as though someone is always watching.
Right.
And that self-reinforces a set of actions, basically.
Right. And that's somehow axiomatically different, because you don't have to like go to jail or get caught shoplifting for this to function. The nun doesn't have to hit you with the ruler for it to work.
I remember growing up, this is my favorite example of like really realizing in retrospect my internalization. I was always told not to curse. I was taught not to curse, and everyone around me all cursed, and I was told not to curse. And then there was one time I was playing street hockey in New Jersey, one of the most clerk's ass thing to do. And I'm playing street hockey, and I get so frustrated with the other people, and I go, "Fuck you, you fucking motherfuckers." I just let out and I think I even said parts of it in Greek, because they were also like Greek neighbors, and I was like, "Miss you, Malaka," and I just started going off, and I was like, I couldn't handle the guilt of it. And so I went to the bathroom and I took soap and I put soap in my mouth.
Oh my God.
Myself, without being told to do it.
Wow.
And I always think about that example when I think about controlled society and like systems of ethics and methods of control, that you don't need somebody to put the soap in your mouth.
Right.
You internalize the rules and ethics so much that you put the soap in your own mouth.
The control society makes the disciplinary society sound almost utopian by comparison. Like, it's like kids on the playground, they goof around, and then like they see the adult coming and they're like, "Oh, we got to behave now so we don't get in trouble." But there's like these spaces of freedom where like you're not being watched, where like people can just be spontaneous and be themselves. And
okay, so disciplinary society, control society, but what does it mean right now where we're at, where we're just completely unaware of who's watching, what's watching? I mean, I guess like we're being sold products. That's ultimately, I mean, that's way simplifying why this stuff is going on. And then obviously like government surveillance and stuff. But what does it mean when we just don't know who's watching and what's going on?
Like, I think that's control society, because you don't know who's watching. You just know that they are. And it does.
I mean, that makes sense to me. I think I'm trying to like turn it to where my brain's been, which is like with this surveillance capitalism and like how little we're aware of how much of ourselves are being sold, just to sell us products and to create profit for companies, but then also like it's being used, it's like that information is being used and reused by multiple people for multiple reasons.
Yeah.
You go, oh my God, they're watching all the emails, they're doing all this, but like, are they really? Are they really? You could maybe doubt. You could maybe say like, maybe that's bullshit. But the promise of this big data crunching AI is that they can do it, and they're trading stocks in it, and they're like, fucking, we caught Osama bin Laden. I don't know. They're gonna need a better demonstration than that. Something repeatable. There's only one Osama bin Laden, so I don't quite buy it all yet. But if they can make a persuasive argument to the public, and they have to, for this software to work in the control society way, they have to convince people that it's real, that they really can comb through terabytes of information in minutes and pick out the deviant behavior that they're looking for, and then people will start acting right.
We should not forget the fact that people buy into this. Like, we do want to make them out like as the consumer as the victim all the time, but if we admit that people like to eat the shit sausage of capital, then we can address it a lot better, I believe. If it's something like fundamental to human desire to just enjoy constant distraction, just petty amusement, and like instantaneous communication that means nothing on the internet, then we should build a framework around that rather than just hold them up as like innocent victims.
You brought up my podcast. We haven't discussed Mark Fisher at all.
Well, I know very little about him, so that might be one reason. But
I worked for the Epic Times.
We're gonna have to do another episode, right?